Come closer. I want to tell you about a crown. Not the glittering thing you might imagine, heavy with jewels and ceremony. No, this crown, England's crown, spent 30 years rolling through mud and blood, from hand to desperate hand, while two families tore a kingdom apart in their hunger to possess it. Picture it there, at the end of everything. August 22, 1485. Bosworth Field. The morning mist clings to the Leicestershire countryside, and somewhere in the trampled grass lies a circlet of gold, knocked from a dead king's head. A simple thing, really, metal shaped by human hands, yet for 3 decades, England had bled for it. They say Henry Tudor found it there, under a hawthorn bush, as if the earth itself had grown tired of its weight. The crown of the Plantagenets, the prize that had driven fathers to kill sons, brothers to betray brothers, mothers to watch their children die. What is it about power that transforms love into murder? What is it about a throne that can take 2 branches of the same royal tree, Lancaster and York, cousins all, and turn them into wolves? For 30 years, from 1455 to 1485, England discovered the answer. The Wars of the Roses were never about principle, never about the good of the realm. They were about one terrible question that echoed through every castle, every battlefield, every sleepless night. Who is willing to sacrifice the most? Meet them, these cousins who became killers. Henry VI of Lancaster, gentle, pious, prone to fits of madness that left him staring at walls while his kingdom crumbled. His queen, Margaret of Anjou, who loved her husband too much to let weakness destroy him, and so became the warrior he could never be. Against them, Richard, Duke of York, who looked at his mad king and saw opportunity. Edward of York, tall and golden, who could charm a crowd and wield a sword with equal skill, and lurking in the shadows, Richard of Gloucester, Edward's brother, whose hunched shoulder carried the weight of ambitions too dark to name aloud. These were not monsters. They were people who loved their children, who prayed to God, who wept when their friends died. But they wanted something more than love, more than prayer, more than friendship. They wanted to be king. Imagine England in the middle of the 15th century, a kingdom that had tasted glory in France under Henry V, only to watch it turn to ash under his son. The great lords had grown fat on war and now prowled their estates like caged beasts, their private armies wearing their badges, the white rose of York, the red rose of Lancaster. In the villages, people learned to read the wind. When armed men appeared on the horizon, you did not ask which rose they served. You hid your grain, your daughters, your silver, and prayed they would pass quickly. The markets emptied when word came of armies gathering. Mothers clutched their sons closer when recruiters appeared in the taverns, speaking of honor and wages and the righteousness of their cause. In London, the great houses on the Strand shuttered their windows when Parliament was called. Everyone knew that parliaments during the wars were not gatherings of law but theaters of vengeance, where yesterday's allies became tomorrow's traitors, where a word spoken carelessly might cost you your head. The Tower of London grew crowded with prisoners who had been kings, princes, dukes, men who had woken one morning to find their stars fallen. It began, as these things always do, with a small crack in a great wall. May 22, 1455. The First Battle of St. Albans. Richard of York, who had been excluded from the king's council, who had watched his enemies whisper poison in the royal ear, decided that words were no longer enough. 3,000 men. Barely an hour of fighting. But when the dust settled, the great lords of Lancaster lay dead in the streets, and Henry VI sat bleeding in a tanner's shop, his crown askew, his mind fled to whatever refuge madness provides. York won that day, but victory in these wars was like grasping water. The king lived, the queen escaped, and Margaret of Anjou, that fierce Frenchwoman who had married a saint and found herself wed to weakness, began to gather the scattered pieces of Lancaster's power. She would not forgive. She would not forget. The battles came faster now, each one bloodier than the last. Wakefield, where Richard of York himself fell, his head taken and crowned with paper and mockery. Towton, fought in a blizzard so thick men could not see their enemies until steel met steel, 20,000 dead by nightfall. the largest slaughter England had ever witnessed. The streams ran red for days. But it was not on a great battlefield that the wars reached their darkest hour. It was in a tower. The Tower of London, where two boys waited for a coronation that would never come. Edward V, 12 years old, rightful King of England. His brother Richard, 9, Duke of York. Their uncle had promised to protect them. Richard of Gloucester, now Richard III, having seized the throne with whispers of bastardy and parliamentary tricks, stared out at the city he had won through betrayal. The boys were a problem. Living, they were a threat. Dead, they were a sin that would stain his soul forever. History does not record the moment the order was given. But in the tower that night, two children who had played at being kings woke in darkness to find that childhood was over. Richard had his throne. He had eliminated his rivals. He had proved that blood meant nothing when weighed against ambition. But in murdering those boys, his own nephews, he had crossed a line that all England could see. A king might kill his enemies, but to kill children? To kill family? Even wolves do not devour their own cubs. Here is what no one expected. The monster Richard III proved to be, in many ways, a better king than his saintly predecessors. He reformed the law courts. He protected merchants from corruption. He spoke English in Parliament when French had been the language of power for centuries. The people, who should have hated him, found that their lives improved under his rule. But England had learned a terrible lesson about itself in 30 years of civil war. Right and wrong, justice and tyranny, these were luxuries for peaceful times. What mattered now was survival. What mattered was finding someone, anyone, who could make the bleeding stop, even if that someone had blood on his hands. And so it was that Henry Tudor, a Welsh exile with a threadbare claim to Lancaster's legacy, found himself sailing toward England with 2,000 men and a promise. Not justice. Justice was a word that had lost its meaning. Not righteousness. God seemed to have abandoned England long ago. Simply this: that the killing would end, that there would be peace. Bosworth Field was not the largest battle of the Wars of the Roses, nor the bloodiest, but it was the last that mattered. Richard III, who had seized power through murder, died as he had lived, with a sword in his hand, fighting for a crown he had never truly earned. His body was stripped, slung across a horse, and buried in an unmarked grave. Kings, it seemed, were as mortal as the children they killed. Henry Tudor became Henry VII not through divine right or popular acclaim, but through the simple fact that he was still breathing when the sun set on August 22, 1485. The Wars of the Roses ended not with a great reconciliation, but with exhaustion. England had grown tired of its own violence. The crown still exists. Not the simple circlet that rolled under the hawthorn bush, that was lost to time, but the idea of it, the weight of it. Henry Tudor married Elizabeth of York, uniting the red rose and the white in his children's blood. Their son became Henry VIII. Their granddaughter became Elizabeth I. The Tudors ruled England for more than a century, and under them, a small island kingdom became an empire. But sometimes, in the quiet places where history gathers like dust, you can still hear the echo of those 30 years. The sound of families destroying themselves for a prize that none of them, in the end, could truly possess. Power, you see, is not something you hold. It is something that holds you. And sometimes, it never lets go.